What if I told you a city of gold was hidden inside Africa, and the world thought it was just a myth? Thousands died crossing this desert, chasing a city they weren't even sure existed. One king was so rich, his gold changed entire economies and revealed Africa's greatest secret.
Imagine hearing a story so unbelievable that you laugh the moment you hear it. A city hidden deep inside Africa. A city overflowing with gold. A city so rich that its streets were said to glitter with wealth. A city where merchants became millionaires, where scholars were treated like celebrities, where caravans carried fortunes across the desert. Sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? Well, hundreds of years ago, people thought exactly the same thing. And that's what makes this story so incredible. Because the city was real. Its name was Timbuktu. Before we begin, there's one thing I need to tell you. Most people know Timbuktu as a strange word, a place used in jokes, a place that sounds imaginary. But by the end of this documentary, you'll understand why kings, explorers, merchants, and even entire nations became obsessed with finding it. And trust me, the final truth about Timbuktu is something most people never discover. So watch until the very end, because the biggest surprise of this story isn't how Timbuktu became rich. It's what happened after the world found it. Now imagine standing in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Nothing around you except endless sand. No roads, no cities, no signs. Just heat, silence, and death. Because the Sahara wasn't simply a desert, it was one of the most dangerous places on Earth. People got lost. Caravans disappeared. Travelers died. Yet somehow, thousands of merchants willingly crossed it, again and again, year after year. Why? Because on the other side, a fortune was waiting. Gold. More gold than many people could imagine. In medieval times, West Africa contained some of the richest gold mines on Earth. And much of that gold eventually passed through one city, Timbuktu. The city's location was almost perfect. It sat near important trade routes connecting North Africa with the kingdoms of West Africa. Every caravan moving across the desert needed a place to stop, a place to trade, a place to rest, a place to do business. That place became Timbuktu, and slowly, a small settlement transformed into one of the richest cities in the world. Imagine waking up every morning and seeing hundreds of camels arriving from distant lands, each carrying valuable cargo: salt, gold, books, jewelry, spices, ivory, silk, everything people wanted, everything people were willing to pay for, and every transaction made Timbuktu wealthier. Soon, stories about the city began spreading. Travelers spoke about its markets, merchants spoke about its riches, explorers spoke about its opportunities, and with every retelling, the legend grew larger. Eventually, the stories became so unbelievable that many Europeans refused to believe them. A city in Africa richer than some European kingdoms? Impossible. A city filled with gold? Impossible. A center of learning attracting scholars from across the world? Impossible. At least, that's what they thought. But the rumors wouldn't die. Year after year, decade after decade, the stories kept spreading. And the more people heard, the more curious they became. Some began asking questions. Others began planning expeditions. A few became obsessed. Because if Timbuktu was real, then it might be one of the greatest discoveries on Earth. Far away from the city, Kings listened to these stories. Merchants listened. Explorers listened. And all of them wondered the same thing. Could a city really be that rich? Could a place like Timbuktu actually exist? Or was it simply a legend told around campfires? The answer would change history forever. But before the world discovered Timbuktu, something happened that made its legend even bigger. A king appeared. A king so wealthy that people could hardly believe he was real. And when he traveled across Africa, the entire world began talking about Timbuktu. That king's name was Mansa Musa, and his journey would turn Timbuktu into the most famous city in Africa. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started. And the next chapter reveals how one man made the entire world obsessed with a city hidden in the desert. Imagine being so rich that wherever you go, the economy changes. Not a city, not a kingdom, an entire economy. Sounds impossible, but that's exactly why people still talk about Mansa Musa today. In the early 1300s, the Mali Empire was becoming one of the most powerful empires on Earth. Its land stretched across vast regions of West Africa. Its mines produced enormous amounts of gold. Its trade routes connected distant civilizations. And sitting within that growing empire was Timbuktu, quietly becoming richer every year. Then came the man who would change everything, Mansa Musa, the ruler of Mali. A king whose wealth became the stuff of legend. Even today, historians struggle to estimate just how rich he really was, because his wealth was beyond comparison. Now imagine hearing a rumor. A king owns so much gold that counting it becomes impossible. Most people would laugh. Most people would call it an exaggeration. But then, Mansa Musa decided to make a journey, and suddenly, the rumors became reality. In 1324, he began a pilgrimage to Mecca, a journey that would become one of the most famous trips in history. But this wasn't an ordinary pilgrimage. This was a royal procession, unlike anything the world had ever seen. Imagine standing on the roadside, looking toward the horizon. At first, you see dust, then movement, then people, hundreds of them, thousands of them. And they keep coming, and coming, and coming. Witnesses described an enormous caravan. Soldiers, officials, servants, merchants, travelers, camels carrying supplies, camels carrying treasure, camels carrying gold. So much gold that people struggled to believe their own eyes. Every city he passed through became fascinated. People crowded the streets. Children ran alongside the caravan. Merchants abandoned their shops just to watch. Everyone wanted to see the richest king on earth. And then, Mansa Musa did something extraordinary. He started giving away gold. Not a little, a lot. To the poor, to travelers, to religious institutions, to local communities. Gold flowed everywhere he went. People were amazed. Many had never seen such generosity. Many had never seen so much wealth. For them, it felt as if an emperor from a fairy tale had suddenly appeared. And just like that, stories began spreading across continents. Stories about a king from Africa. Stories about endless gold. Stories about an empire overflowing with riches. Stories about a city called Timbuktu. Soon, merchants in North Africa heard the stories. Then, Europe heard them. Then, scholars heard them. And suddenly, everyone was asking the same question. Where was Timbuktu? Because if the king was this rich, what must his city look like? If this was only a glimpse of his wealth, then what treasures waited inside his empire? The mystery grew. The legend grew. The obsession grew. And Timbuktu became one of the most talked about places on earth, even among people who had never seen it. Question for you. If someone told you a city was made of gold, would you believe it? Or would you think it was just a myth? Let me know in the comments. Meanwhile, back in Timbuktu, something even more important than gold was happening. Something that would make the city famous for centuries. Because Timbuktu wasn't just becoming rich, it was becoming intelligent. One of the greatest centers of learning the world had ever seen. And what happened next shocked everyone who finally reached the city. Enjoying the story? If you're enjoying this journey into the lost city of gold, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Because the next chapter reveals a side of Timbuktu that most people have never heard about. And honestly, it may be even more impressive than the gold. When people hear the name Timbuktu, they usually think about one thing: gold, treasure, wealth, riches. And that's understandable. After all, the city became famous because of its incredible wealth. But here's the shocking truth. The thing that made Timbuktu truly special wasn't gold. It was knowledge. Imagine traveling across one of the harshest deserts on earth, not to find treasure, not to become rich, not to join an army, but to study, to learn, to read books. Sounds strange, doesn't it? Yet that's exactly what thousands of people did, because Timbuktu was becoming something extraordinary, a city of scholars. While many European cities were still struggling through difficult times, Timbuktu was building libraries, creating schools, collecting manuscripts, teaching mathematics, teaching astronomy, teaching law, teaching science, teaching philosophy. And people traveled thousands of miles just to study there. Imagine entering Timbuktu for the first time. The streets are busy. Merchants are trading goods. Camels move through the city. But something catches your attention. Books. Everywhere. Books being bought. Books being sold. Books being copied by hand. Books being studied. In many places, gold was considered the most valuable thing a person could own. But in Timbuktu, books could be worth even more. Think about that. A city where knowledge was treated like treasure. A city where learning created status. A city where scholars were respected almost as much as kings. At the heart of this intellectual world stood famous institutions. Places where students gathered, where teachers shared knowledge, where ideas traveled across continents. One of the most famous was Sankor, a center of learning that attracted students from across Africa and beyond. Imagine sitting into one of its classrooms. A teacher stands before you. Students surround him. Some have traveled for months just to be there. Some crossed deserts. Some crossed entire kingdoms. All for one reason: knowledge. And the knowledge they studied was remarkable. Astronomy, medicine, geography, mathematics, religion, history, law. Subjects that shaped entire generations. Slowly, Timbuktu transformed into something more than a city. It became a symbol of African achievement, a symbol of education, a symbol of intellectual excellence. And people everywhere began hearing stories about it. But here's where things become fascinating. The city didn't just collect knowledge, it preserved it. Thousands upon thousands of handwritten manuscripts filled libraries and private collections. Ancient texts, scientific discoveries, historical records, ideas passed down through generations. Imagine opening a manuscript written hundreds of years ago. The ink may have faded, the pages may be fragile, but the words survive. The thoughts survive. The knowledge survives. It's like hearing a voice from the past, a voice refusing to be forgotten. And those voices still exist today, because many of Timbuktu's manuscripts survived. Not all of them, but enough to reveal something incredible. Timbuktu wasn't simply rich, it was brilliant. This shocked many people, because for centuries, some outsiders believed Africa had little written history, little scholarship, little intellectual tradition. The manuscripts of Timbuktu proved otherwise. They revealed a world of learning that many had overlooked. And suddenly, the legend of Timbuktu became even greater. Because now, the city wasn't famous only for gold. It was famous for ideas, for education, for knowledge, for wisdom. But every great city eventually faces challenges, and Timbuktu was no exception. Because while scholars filled its libraries, and merchants filled its markets, danger was approaching. Slowly, quietly, relentlessly, powerful forces were beginning to change the world. Trade routes were shifting. Empires were competing. New ambitions were rising. And soon, the city that seemed unstoppable would face its greatest test. Question for you. If you could choose only one, which would you rather have? Unlimited gold? Unlimited knowledge? Comment your answer below. And if you're enjoying this documentary so far, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Because in the next chapter, we'll uncover how the legendary city of gold began losing the very thing that made it great. And the story is far more dramatic than most people realize. Imagine standing at the peak of success. Your city is famous across the world. Merchants arrive every day. Scholars fill your libraries. Gold flows through your markets. Your name is known from Africa to the Middle East. Life seems perfect. But history has a cruel habit. The higher a city rises, the harder it can fall. And Timbuktu was about to learn that lesson. For centuries, the city had thrived because of trade. Caravans crossed the Sahara. Gold moved north. Salt moved south. Merchants grew rich. And Timbuktu sat at the center of it all. But slowly, the world began changing. And most people didn't notice, at first. Far away, European sailors were exploring new routes, new oceans, new opportunities. Instead of crossing deserts, ships began crossing seas. And those new routes started changing global trade forever. Imagine owning the busiest marketplace in the world. Then suddenly, customers begin finding another route. A faster route, a cheaper route, a safer route. Little by little, your marketplace becomes quieter. That's exactly what started happening. The trade routes that had made Timbuktu wealthy were becoming less important. And when trade declines, money follows. But that wasn't the only problem, because while trade was changing, powerful armies were watching the wealth, watching the influence, watching the opportunity. And eventually, someone decided to take it. In the late 1500s, a powerful Moroccan army crossed the Sahara. Think about how unbelievable that sounds. An army marching across one of the harshest deserts on Earth. Thousands of soldiers, thousands of miles, all heading toward one target, Timbuktu. The city had survived countless challenges, but this threat was different. This wasn't a group of merchants. This wasn't a caravan. This was war. Imagine being a citizen of Timbuktu. You hear rumors, then reports, then confirmation. An army is coming, and it's getting closer every day. Fear spreads, questions spread, uncertainty spreads. What will happen to the city? Can it survive? Can anyone stop them? The answer arrived sooner than anyone expected. The Moroccan forces eventually gained control. And although Timbuktu wasn't completely destroyed, something important changed. Very important. The city lost much of its independence. Its power weakened. Its influence faded. And the golden age that had made it legendary began slipping away. But perhaps the greatest tragedy wasn't the loss of wealth. It was the loss of stability. Because when uncertainty enters a city, people begin leaving. Merchants seek safer opportunities. Scholars travel elsewhere. Trade becomes weaker, and the cycle continues. Imagine walking through streets that were once crowded, markets that were once full, libraries that were once alive with debate, now quieter than before. Not empty, but changing. The city that had once amazed the world was slowly becoming a shadow of its former self. Yet even then, the legend refused to die. Stories about Timbuktu continued spreading. Stories about its gold. Stories about its scholars. Stories about its mysteries. And far away in Europe, those stories created a new obsession. Because many explorers still had one burning question. Was Timbuktu really as incredible as the stories claimed? Or had people exaggerated everything? Some became so obsessed with finding the answer that they risked their lives. Crossing deserts, facing bandits, enduring extreme heat. All for the chance to see Timbuktu with their own eyes. And what they eventually discovered would shock the world. Not because Timbuktu was fake, but because the reality was very different from the legend. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this documentary, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Because the next chapter reveals what happened when European explorers finally reached the legendary City of Gold. And their reaction wasn't what anyone expected. For hundreds of years, Timbuktu existed somewhere between reality and legend. People talked about it. People dreamed about it. People argued about it. But very few outsiders had actually seen it. Imagine hearing stories about a city filled with gold, a city hidden beyond one of the deadliest deserts on Earth, a city so rich that kings envied it. Wouldn't you want to find it? Wouldn't you want to see it with your own eyes? That is exactly what happened to countless explorers. The legend of Timbuktu became an obsession. Some wanted fame. Some wanted fortune. Some wanted answers. And some were willing to risk everything. The journey itself was terrifying. Before reaching Timbuktu, explorers first had to survive the Sahara. And the Sahara showed no mercy. Imagine endless sand stretching to every horizon. The sun burning overhead. Water running low. No roads. No maps you can fully trust. No rescue coming if something goes wrong. Just you and the desert. Many never made it. Some became lost. Some died from disease. Some were attacked by bandits. Some simply vanished, their dreams swallowed by the desert itself. Yet despite the danger, more explorers kept coming, because the mystery was too powerful. The possibility of discovering the legendary City of Gold was too tempting. Then, finally, in the early 1800s, several Europeans managed to reach Timbuktu. After centuries of rumors, the world was about to learn the truth. And the truth shocked them. Not because Timbuktu wasn't real, it was. Not because the stories were completely false, they weren't. The shock came from something else. The city wasn't what they expected. Many explorers had imagined a giant golden metropolis, massive palaces covered in treasure, streets overflowing with riches, a place unlike anything on Earth. Instead, they found a city that looked far more ordinary than the legend suggested. Mud brick buildings, simple streets, traditional architecture. A city shaped by centuries of desert life. Some explorers were disappointed. They expected fantasy. They found reality. But here's what they failed to understand. The true wealth of Timbuktu had never been its appearance. Its wealth came from its influence, its trade, its knowledge, its history, its position at the center of a world most outsiders barely understood. Imagine judging a library by its walls, ignoring the knowledge inside. That's exactly what many visitors did. They saw the buildings, but they missed the story. Because beneath those simple streets was one of the most remarkable histories in Africa. A city that had connected continents. A city that had educated generations. A city that had become a symbol of possibility. And slowly, historians began realizing something important. The legend wasn't entirely wrong. It had simply focused on the wrong treasure. The greatest treasure of Timbuktu wasn't gold, it was knowledge. Thousands of manuscripts, centuries of learning, records of science, records of law, records of history, records that preserved the voices of the past, and those voices still had more to say. Because hidden among the manuscripts, hidden inside homes and libraries, was evidence of a forgotten intellectual world, a world many people never knew existed. As researchers studied these documents, a new picture of Timbuktu emerged. Not merely a city of gold, but a city of ideas, a city of learning, a city that helped shape African history. Yet while scholars were uncovering these treasures, a new danger was approaching. A danger very different from invading armies, very different from desert storms. A danger that threatened the manuscripts themselves. And if it succeeded, thousands of years of knowledge could disappear forever. Quick reminder, if you're enjoying this documentary, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Because the next chapter contains one of the most incredible rescue missions in modern history. A mission that saved the hidden treasures of Timbuktu from destruction, and almost nobody knows it happened. Imagine discovering a treasure worth millions. Not gold, not diamonds, not jewels, but something far more valuable. Knowledge. For centuries, People searched Timbuktu looking for riches. Many dreamed of finding gold. Many hoped to uncover hidden treasure. But while they were searching the markets, the greatest treasure was sitting quietly inside homes, inside chests, inside private libraries, waiting. Because hidden throughout Timbuktu were hundreds of thousands of ancient manuscripts, handwritten documents, some hundreds of years old, others even older. Imagine opening a wooden chest. Inside are fragile pages, pages touched by scholars centuries ago, pages carrying ideas from another age, pages that somehow survived wars, storms, empires, and time itself. The manuscripts contained astonishing information: astronomy, medicine, mathematics, law, history, poetry, philosophy, religion. Subjects studied long before many outsiders realized such scholarship existed in West Africa. Some texts discussed the movement of stars. Some explained legal systems. Some recorded historical events. Some described scientific observations. Together, they painted a picture of a civilization far more sophisticated than many people imagined. Imagine reading a document written 500 years ago. The writer is gone. The city has changed. The world is different. Yet his words still speak, still teach, still survive. That was the real miracle of Timbuktu. Not the gold, not the wealth, the survival of knowledge. For generations, families protected these manuscripts, passing them from parent to child, grandparent to grandchild, keeping them hidden, keeping them safe, understanding their value long before the rest of the world did. And then, a new crisis emerged, one that threatened everything. In the early 21st century, conflict reached northern Mali. Violence spread across the region. Uncertainty returned. And suddenly, people feared for the future of Timbuktu's manuscripts. Imagine spending centuries protecting knowledge, only to watch it face destruction. The thought was unbearable. Something had to be done, and quickly. What happened next sounds like a movie, but it was real. Ordinary people, librarians, families, scholars, citizens, secretly began moving manuscripts, one box at a time, one vehicle at a time, one journey at a time. Under enormous risk, thousands of documents were quietly transported away from danger, hidden, protected, preserved. Night after night, the operation continued. Not for money, not for fame, but for history. Imagine carrying a manuscript written hundreds of years ago, knowing that if it is lost, a piece of human history disappears forever. That responsibility must have felt enormous, yet people continued. Because they understood something important. Civilizations survive through memory, and memory survives through records. Against incredible odds, most of the manuscripts were saved. Hundreds of thousands of pages, hundreds of years of knowledge, protected from destruction. When historians later learned the full story, they called it one of the greatest cultural rescue missions in modern history. And honestly, it's hard to disagree. Think about it. For centuries, people searched Timbuktu looking for gold. Yet the city's greatest treasure wasn't buried underground. It wasn't locked in a vault. It wasn't hidden inside a palace. It was hidden in words, ideas, knowledge, history. And because of the courage of ordinary people, those treasures survived. But now we arrive at the final mystery, a mystery that changes everything. Because despite all its wealth, despite all its fame, despite all its influence, Timbuktu eventually faded from the center of world history. How does a city become a legend, then slowly disappear from the spotlight? How does the world's most famous city become a place many people barely know today? The answer is both fascinating and surprisingly emotional. Quick reminder: if you're enjoying this documentary, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because we're approaching the end of this incredible journey, and the final chapter reveals the true legacy of Timbuktu and why its story matters more today than ever before. At the beginning of this documentary, I told you a story about a city so rich that many people believed it couldn't possibly be real. A city hidden beyond the Sahara, a city filled with gold, a city that became a legend. Now, after everything we've discovered, it's time to answer the question that brought us here. Was Timbuktu really the city of gold? The answer is yes and no. Yes, because enormous wealth passed through its markets. Gold from West Africa helped make Timbuktu famous across the world. Kings became wealthy. Merchants became wealthy. Empires became wealthy. And the city's name became synonymous with riches. But no, because the greatest treasure of Timbuktu was never gold. It was something far more powerful, something that survives longer than gold, something that cannot be stolen by armies, something that cannot be buried by sand. Knowledge. Think about it. The gold is gone. The merchants are gone. The kings are gone. The caravans are gone. But the ideas remain. The manuscripts remain. The history remains. The story remains. And maybe that's the most incredible part of all. Because when people first heard about Timbuktu, they imagined treasure chests, golden palaces, mountains of wealth. What they should have imagined was libraries, scholars, teachers, students, writers, thinkers, people whose ideas crossed deserts and survived centuries. Imagine standing in Timbuktu today. The city is quieter than it once was. The massive caravans no longer arrive like they did centuries ago. The world has changed. Trade routes have changed. Empires have disappeared. But the city still stands, still watching, still waiting, still carrying one of the greatest stories in human history. Imagine the generations that lived there, the merchants who crossed the Sahara, the scholars who filled libraries with knowledge, the families who protected ancient manuscripts, the people who refused to let their history disappear. None of them could have known that hundreds of years later, people around the world would still be talking about Timbuktu. Yet here we are. And perhaps that's why this story matters. Because Timbuktu reminds us that history is often bigger than we think. The most important stories are not always the most famous. The greatest achievements are not always the most celebrated. And sometimes, the world's greatest treasures are hidden in places people overlook. Remember how the world once thought Timbuktu was a myth? A fantasy, a fairy tale, a place that couldn't possibly exist. Yet it did exist. And in many ways, it still does. Not just as a city, but as an idea, a symbol, a reminder of what human beings can achieve, a reminder that knowledge matters, a reminder that culture matters, a reminder that preserving history matters. Because once a story is forgotten, part of humanity is forgotten with it. And that's why Timbuktu survived. Not because of its gold, not because of its wealth, but because people cared enough to remember. So, what is the real secret of Timbuktu? The real secret is that the city of gold was never truly about gold. It was about the value of human knowledge. And that treasure is priceless. Some cities become famous because of what they build. Some become famous because of what they conquer. But Timbuktu became legendary because of what it preserved. And centuries later, that legacy still shines brighter than gold. Final question. Before this documentary ends, tell me in the comments, what surprised you most about Timbuktu? The gold? The manuscripts? The Sahara trade routes? Mansa Musa? I'd love to read your answer. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon. It helps the channel grow and allows us to uncover more forgotten mysteries from Africa and around the world. Long before the world found Timbuktu, it was already making history. Long before people searched for its gold, it was building knowledge. And long after the gold faded, the knowledge remained. Because cities may fall, empires may vanish, but great ideas can live forever. The end.